Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Patrick Crouch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gorn, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Number 20 in my 50 most relevant. Can you believe it? You are over the halfway hump. You are heading into the teens. The 50 most relevant is fast wrapping up for your 2025 Fantasy Footy preseason. A series that's all about having a conversation with members of the Coaches Panel, members of the Fantasy Footy community at large, about who I think are the most important and relevant players to consider and to discuss before we get to lockout and round one commences for 2025. Joining me on this episode, a man that we have now, fast friends this year is well and truly the term. I think he is tying Mini Monk almost for the amount of times we've had him on the podcast, but he is the host of the Fantasy Ball Boys podcast. Mitch Casey, nice to see you today on the episode talking about Izak Rankine. He's an interesting and intriguing boy.
Yeah, I beat out a few Crows fans to get in for this one. I'm sure of it. And anytime I'm in the same, rarefied air as Mini Monk, I think that's a good thing. So no, very, very excited to talk about Izak Rankine. I think Rankine is a very interesting player. I think the team he plays for, the Adelaide Crows, and their midfield mix especially, is a very interesting team to dissect. And I think what Rankine represents as an option in terms of that F1 position, I think is also a very interesting discussion in of itself. So, yeah, can't wait to dive in.
An average of 79.8 last year in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, meaning in those two formats, he's priced just over the $800,000 price point. It's an 808,500 in Dream Team and 819K in AFL Fantasy. While for Supercoach, yeah, you shouldn't be surprised. A player of his ability and precision sees a higher bump in his scoring. He's a 96.8 average last year, a $521,600 price point. He played 15 games for us last year, and his season high scores, funnily enough, have turned into career high scores in 2024. So a new PB for him now in Supercoach is a 142. He did that against the now premiers, the Brisbane Lions. While you go back a few weeks later in AFL Fantasy up against the GWS Giants, he pumps out a 115. Mitch, doesn't take much of watching the Adelaide Crows and prior to that when he was at the Gold Coast Suns just to see how unbelievably gifted this player is. Just has speed for days. His not just turn of pace, but then his ability to use that in the correct moments to burst away from opponent, to create separation inside forward 50. And now that he's also added some midfield presence to get away from opponents in stoppage and clearance situations. We've talked about for years, ever since he got drafted at the Suns, about how scary good he is inside forward 50. But he's become an underrated player in the areas of winning contested ball and getting clearances. He's developing to one of the most dangerous players in the AFL, and he could go up a gear in 2025.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned there about him being we've known he's been a very dangerous player inside forward 50, has excellent goal sense about him, very elusive, but his ability, especially last year, we saw it probably more than we have in previous seasons, that he's actually a really good contested player when it comes to breaking away from stoppages and getting those clearances in there as well. Being dangerous by foot, not just finishing, but also setting up goals as well. So he is someone that I think sometimes gets pigeonholed into that. He's a forward and that's all he is at times, whereas he definitely has the makings, in my opinion, to be that prototypical Dusty, Jordan De Goey, Christian Petrarca type player that plays that midfield role, makes that switch to get the matchup that he wants in the forward line and vice versa, come up to the stoppage when he wants to. He really is one of the better players at Adelaide, and probably one of the better mid forwards in the competition. So there's a lot of upside here, still at only 24 years old.
and only a relative new movement into a centre bounce midfielder too. Despite only averaging 79.8 last year in fantasy and dream team, you're looking for trends and moments to be able to build hoped narrative and story about what the coming season might be. And he still had 3 tons for us last year, a 104, a 106 and a 111. And once a bunch of forwards have departed for us the new year, well, he's a top 8 forward by average for us. That's really the low bar we're currently sitting at until some players put some scores on or we get a couple of DPPs during the year. While in Supercoach, he's the 3rd ranked forward by average. A 96.8 is the average. He's coming off 5 tons. And then he's got a real ceiling about him in that format of the game. And it should be no surprises. Mitch has talked about how good he is with ball in hand, not just a finisher, but a winner of the ball in tight situations. It's why he's got 4 scores over 120. A 142 is that season high score. And to go with it, a pretty decent scoring baseman as well. Just the 3 scores dipping under 80. Last year, when he attended 30% of centre bounces or more, which is about average in and around the space, not only for him, but certainly well below what he could deliver. We're talking about an average of 87.8 in AFL Fantasy, so a 10 points per game almost jump. And in Supercoach, it's a 107.9. So when he gets the opportunity in the midfield, we're seeing some scoring upside. But the big question we've got to ask ourselves, Mitch, what's this role? What's the split? And who's in the mix? We've talked about it a little bit with James Peatling in the 50. Jordan Dawson was just a few days ago. You're outside of the South Australian and Crows bubble. Objectively, how do you see this role, the split, and the teammates in this midfield all stacking up for us?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I feel like the Crows midfield has been a discussion for years now. It seems to be something that both fantasy, we have, we want to look at them. They're one of the highest stoppage teams in the competition. I think the last 3 or 4 seasons, they've been right up there in terms of leading the competition for ruck contests. So there is a lot of points there to be had in the Crows midfield. And the general media, there's a lot of talk about, them being very one note in the midfield, a lot of similar pace with your Matt Crouches and your Rory Lairds and those sort of types going through there. So there's a lot of attention on this midfield and what it's going to look like. And you've obviously got some new faces in James Peatling coming through. There's a few different ways I could see this midfield going. And I think, like you mentioned, 30% CBAs for Rankine, he's averaging 88. Even if he just goes 40% CBAs, he's averaging in the low 90s, 93, slightly above 93. So, and that's definitely top 6 worthy for a player. Now, it is a small sample size, and like you said, he only started entering the CBAs last season. Prior to that, he was 2%, 5%, 1%, 2% in his first 4 seasons. Last year was the first season, as a total of the season, he was at 38%. So could that be the trend of it starting to climb up and it only gets greater from here for a good chunk of his career? It very well could be. There's just a few things that still make me a little bit unsure. We saw, much to my disagreement, that Jordan Dawson, who in my opinion is one of the best mids in the competition, the Bontempelli of the Adelaide Crows, he spent time forward. He spent time on the wing. Rory Laird, we're all expecting to go to halfback, but you've also recruited Izak Cumming. Does that maybe change those plans? I know you've talked about in the 50 most relevant at times, Matt Crouch, is he in the team? Is he out of the team? Berry, we're all expecting to kind of almost be replaced by Peatling, but we want to see that first. And then you've got Saligo. You've got a few guys running through there. So I'll return serve to you as the Adelaide Crows man. I think the best case scenario you would have Rory Laird out of the side, or Rory Laird out of the midfield, I should say, in the back line, and Matt Crouch out of the side. How confident are you that is the case, and how confident are you that if it is the case round 1, that we see that for an extended period of time and they don't chuck him back in there when they lose a couple games?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, and we talked about this with the fantasy nut on Jordan Dawson a few days ago. It was, well, the pathway to Dawson going back to 110 is linked to Crouch in that midfield. How confident am I that he's not in best 22? It's hopeful is probably the most optimistic I can be. And that's more in the sense of if his ball winning, and he's still a very good ball winner, as much as Crows fans and fantasy pundits want to knock him, he's a really good contested clearance player, got really clean elite hands. The only reason I would suggest maybe it's time to fade away from him is it allows Dawson to be the big body, allow Saligo to be your accumulator, let Peatling be your protection of your bodies and your ball winners, as well as some speed and pressure. And now there's the pathway for others to flow through there. I think the beautiful thing for Rankine is, though, regardless of Crouch in or out or Dawson split in or out, he offers a fresh dynamic to this Crows midfield that they just don't have just yet. Draper in time might have that, but I don't see a world where he's anything under 35% centre bounce presence. So to me, while Crouch I think is a variable that impacts Dawson, that would impact Peatling to a degree, I think he's pretty unaffected by the other variables around him because, as you said, great clearance winner, got a good stoppage rate, and then if he finds his way in a transition to get a favourable matchup forward, my gosh, if you don't have your best small defender on him inside forward 50, I don't care how good your stoppage mid is. If Rankine's inside forward 50 on a stoppage mid, he'll still torch them with how clean he is. So I'm quite positive about Izak Rankine this year, that I don't see anything below 35. I do not see anything over 50% centre bounces. I think that's too far the other way. But if he's anywhere in the midst, I think you shed the stats of him at 40% plus. We're talking a top 6 forward in fantasy, and now he's on the pathway to average 100 plus in Supercoach.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned there, like he's dangerous. In all the games that he played 30% or more CBAs, he kicked a goal in every single game. So it doesn't prevent him being a threat in that part of the field. And in fact, I think in ways it can actually help him. So I think it really does come down to that mix. Now, if I was the coach, and again, this is a dangerous game to be playing for, especially a team like Adelaide that mixes and matches as much as they do. But if I was the coach, I've said before, Jordan Dawson's your Ferrari. And what I like to say is you don't park your Ferrari on the street so that you can get your Toyota Corolla in the garage. He's the guy you want in there, and you build the team around him. I think Saligo is probably the next guy in there. I think you're going to have Peatling in there. To what degree, I'm unsure of yet. I'm less quick to put Matt Crouch into the twos. I think now that if we expect Rory Laird to be going to halfback, I think Crouch's impact and value it overlaps less with someone like a Laird. So what he brings is more valued in that midfield now that it's a little bit, you've got a little bit more speed in there with someone like, a Saligo, with someone like a Rankine if he's in there. And then Rankine can be, what would that be? The sort of the 4th, 5th guy. Yep. And then you've got Sid Draper. So it kind of, how much are Adelaide going to come out of the gates going, all right, we're going to go for it. We're trying to make finals. Sid Draper, wait your time. You're going to get a chance in there later. But for now, we need Rankine in there. We need Peatling in there because they're our best players right now versus, no, we want to force and gift minutes to Draper to come in there. Matt Crouch is still really good at what he does. The thing that makes me hopeful for Rankine is I don't think he needs to be a 50, 60, 70% CBA, guys. Okay. I think 30 to 40, 40 to 50 is enough to get that upside of a 90 to 95 in AFL Fantasy. So I think there is room in there, but it does require either Matt Crouch not in the side or Sid Draper to be fairly outside of the mix of the centre bounce rotations. And if you think either of those things are distinctly likely, then I would start to have a bit of skepticism about all of those things happening at once and all of those things happening for multiple games in a row. Like you might see a spike in CBA's one game, but then he might be more forward the next game. And that's not always conducive to consistent fantasy scoring.
No, it's certainly not. If you believe the Crows are going to improve on their 2024 season and be a little bit closer to the mean of what they were in 2023, it shouldn't come as any surprise to you that a guy that plays so much forward of the ball that he has a better fantasy output when the Crows are on the victory side of things than opposed to not. So he's going 11 points per game better in fantasy when the Crows win, as opposed to in Supercoach. He's going 17 points per game when they win, in contrast to when they lose. So if you're a believer that the Crows are closer to knocking on the door of finals than knocking on the door of another bottom four finish, that'll give you a little bit more confidence. And if you are starting him, that there's a number of reasons for it, but one of them is because you think there's a little bit of value built into what he is. And so you're going to need to hope that the Crows show an element of higher performance, get some early wins on the board, and he ultimately, from a fantasy and Supercoach perspective, gives us some decent scores to fly out of the year. And so if you look at the Crows' first few games of the year, Mitch, I'm keen on your thoughts about this, is they're at home against the Saints. They'd probably hope to win that one. If you're going to then play Essendon away anyway, you'd rather take them on at the G than you would at Marvel Stadium. North Melbourne at home, Gold Coast at People's Choice, at People First Stadium up on the Gold Coast, Geelong for Gather Round, the Giants at home, the Dockers away, and then Carlton back at home. There's a decent stretch of not only some favourable matchups, but a lot of Adelaide Oval matchups in there. Outside of getting a West Coast or a Richmond, it's probably as good as Crows fans and Izak Rankine truthers could probably hope for.
We're so done with New Year, New You. This year, it's more you on Bumble. More of you shamelessly sending playlists, especially that one filled with show tunes. More of you finding Geminis because you know you always like them. More of you dating with intention because you know what you want. And you know what? We love that for you. Someone else will too. Be more you this year and find them on Bumble.
Hey, Atlanta. Say hello to Small Business Help from Apple. That's right. We're here to make starting and running your business simpler. From helping you choose the right devices to setting them up hassle-free, we can help you build your business in no time. Speak to a business expert and get the help you need at no cost whatsoever. At Apple, we're open for your small business. Go to apple.com/small business or visit an Apple store to learn more.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some positive matchups. You know, Essendon, it might be a tough match, especially away, but they do give up plenty of points, especially to midfielders and forwards. North Melbourne, Gold Coast, similarly, and same with Geelong. You know, there might be a tough matchup on paper for the team, but they do leak points, and especially if you're not playing at GMHBA Stadium, it does help with that game being in gather round. So I don't think the draw is necessarily a difficult draw. You know, you stay away from the Port Adelaides and the Hawthorns of the world, which are a little bit tougher matchups for midfielders. Your Sydneys and Brisbanes aren't until later in the seasons, which are tougher matchups for more forward players as well. So I don't think, you would love to see a West Coast matchup maybe a bit earlier, maybe a Collingwood matchup or a Richmond matchup a bit earlier, but I don't think it's something to be concerned about. I think there's definitely room for the Crows to be sort of those first 6 rounds. Maybe they come out of the gates 3-3 or 4-2, and it's enough for Rankine to get a piece of the pie there. So, especially with, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the first 6 games at Adelaide Oval, so only 2 games away being Essendon and Gold Coast. So, that's a positive start because you do want these players to get off to a good start, especially if you're picking them because they have value. It's not something that makes me go, I have to clear my schedule and make sure I've got someone from the Crows in my team. But it is, I'd say, a slight positive.
It certainly is. There's 2 more things I want to ask you before we then turn the corner and see what it looks like for him on draft day. We are gifted with an amazing set of value spaces this year. Specifically in the forward lines. Now that all the formats have been open for, Supercoach and Dream Team well over a week, Fantasy probably about a month, if not more than that by now, we start to see some of the ownership trends. And so the combination of the McRae, Philippou, Daniel, and Bailey Smith across all the formats, it's probably going to be the most common combo we see inside all the formats, to be fair, and to a degree, understandably so. I guess my question for you is, I'm seeing some hesitancy in the community to have confidence that a McRae at F1 is the type of confidence you want in your forward line. And then people, maybe this is an unfair statement, forcing an F1 and or an F2 in there to build a little bit more value protection. So in Supercoach, Horne-Francis is the number one forward by average. So pushing Rankine in at F2. In fantasy, it's pushing Rankine in because it's like, oh, maybe I don't think Horne-Francis has got as much upside. Oh, but I've heard Mitch and MJ talking about Rankine. So he's the guy that can protect that. What's your thoughts around forcing a position versus just letting the value dictate your structure? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue with the conversation now is it's January.
Yeah.
So a lot of the rookie options, and a lot of the unforeseen breakout options are just that. They're not seen just yet. So, because the rookies are going to dictate that structure. We can all good and well sit here and say, like, okay, we can have Rankine, Shea Bolton, Jason Horne-Francis in at this F1 and pigeonhole him in. But if Izak Kako comes out and just blows us away and he's the next Ollie Dempsey, well then all of those talking points are a bit of a moot point because maybe you want to have two rookies in your forward lines on there. Maybe Elijah Hewitt is lighting the world to start the preseason. Joe Berry is dominating. I'm not someone who pretends to be a rookie expert or knows a lot about these sort of guys. That information is going to come to us later. So having that ability to pivot and be ready to make those structural changes, I think it is important. I do like to, because I don't know about these players, have a backup plan ready to go. So if it comes to round one and all these rookies fall over and there's no real option, I sort of know the guys that I'm looking for that at least present a little bit of upside. And specifically on Horne-Francis, like he's the most popular player in AFL Fantasy, 37.5% owned as that F1. He, to me, especially in AFL Fantasy, I don't know too much about Supercoach. I'd imagine he's a bit better over in that format. But at least in fantasy, he's a guy that, to me, presents with a fairly scary floor, a fairly infrequent ceiling, and someone that I'd be very happy to go against. I'm not scared of going against a Horne-Francis. So him at a higher ownership when he has a low floor, there's a chance for me to get a step up on the competition who owns him if he drops a poor score early, and me with someone like an Izak Rankine who I can get for $100,000 cheaper, hopefully use that cash somewhere else to strengthen my team elsewhere. Maybe they can go toe-to-toe to start the year, and hopefully I've invested that money for something a bit better in my side. So I think that's the appeal. Whether or not we are quote-unquote forcing it is a discussion I think will be answered closer to the season starting when we have those rookie options a bit more clear to us. But for now, I think looking at those options is definitely something that we should be doing to make sure we're turning over every stone.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. We're on the final day of January, less than 24 hours away from hitting February. If you're listening to this on the day it gets released, this is what this beautiful time of the preseason is about. We haven't seen community series matches yet. We haven't seen clubs doing their fake intra-club versions. Trial and error. Wipe your team clean. Try a different structure. Try a different thing. Give yourself those variables because, as Mitch has pointed out, all it takes is one thing to change. And if you haven't got plans B, C, and D, you're going to get panicked when it comes to lockout day and all of a sudden force some things in your team that ultimately you'll probably regret looking at the end of round one. Look, one last thing I've got to ask you. He's had 3 hamstring injuries since landing at the Crows. Probably the most famous was that one where he ran too far down the wings of the MCG and Crows fans were convinced they were going to win even though the ball wasn't even inside 50. But that's fine. That's another story for Crows fans to complain about. But that's 3 in an 18-month window. He's also had a suspension in there, and he's then been knocked out in that famous Dan Houston collision. I actually haven't asked you your philosophy on starting injured players. I think mine's fairly well known. If you listen to the 50 most relevant, every time we have an injured player, the run-up gets on and full, Mitchell Stark style, you know exactly where it's heading. But do you have a similar or a different sentiment around guys that have got a growing injury history that's at least consistent, which Izak's unfortunately is? It does always seem to be soft tissue.
Yeah, I think to me, there's probably 2 or 3 major factors that build into someone being, I guess, correctly or more likely labeled as injury prone to me. The number one thing for me is a player's age. The older you get, the more likely you're going to have an injury. It is just facts. I mean, I don't know about you, man, but I'm approaching 30 in a couple of months and my body's already starting to break down. But so if someone's younger, I'm less concerned about them recovering from previous injuries. The second factor is if they've had multiple injuries of the same type, specifically multiple injuries that have required some kind of surgical intervention. So if you're coming off multiple knee surgeries or something like that, you've had multiple foot surgeries, multiple shoulder surgeries. If that's the case, then to me that is starting to, especially the knees. You know, we're talking meniscus and things like that. They often go in, they repair it. Sometimes I'll take a few things out. That doesn't come back. So when you start to see that, that's when I start to get a little bit wary. And the third thing is, how recent was the most recent injury? You know, if he's had a hamstring injury in the preseason, then that concerns me a lot more than him having a hamstring injury 12, 18 months ago. Because by now, these people have the best rehab staff in the world. You know, they know what they're doing. Hamstrings are not an uncommon injury in the AFL. So the rehab protocol is pretty cut and dry. So if I'm hearing positive things coming out of the club, there's no word on him being limited in training. He's playing the preseason games. He looks like Izak Rankine. I see no reason to be nervous about something that could potentially happen when that possibility is there for every single player in the AFL. Just because you've never had a hamstring issue in the past doesn't mean you're precluded from having one this season. I think that is just people, you know, making a narrative to point to something to say, you know, don't be fooled by what you know is, I guess, the people that are concerned about that. So he's 24 years old. From everything I've heard, he's had a pretty clean preseason so far. So if all these things hold up, I'm not too worried about him being quote unquote injury prone this season.
There's a world where Izak Rankine goes from a player that's a dynamic player through the forward lines that's fun to watch, and we look at and know that he's going to float around the upper echelon somewhere of the top line forwards unless we get some great influx of DPPs during the season. And then there's also a world where he finds the perfect split of midfield and forward time. And if he finds that, which I'm pretty confident the Crows want for him, both for goal scoring and for ball winning and for speed around the ground, there's a world where I see 10 points per game of upside comfortably based at what he's priced at. If you can believe and see the Crows heading up the ladder, maybe not to finals, but north of where they are, you can see that 35-40% centre bounce split that I think is on the lower end, but probably on the safe to assume end of what he will be. I don't see a world, barring injury, where he does not become a 90s forward for us in AFL Fantasy and where he does not become 100 forward for us in Supercoach. And in that case, oh boy, is he relevant. And boy, is he priced at potentially his cheapest price point of the year. And so if you haven't considered Izak Rankine because you're either forcing something else at F1, you don't think there's enough upside, or whatever it is, that's what this preseason series is all about, is having a conversation and considering players, positions, structures, and outcomes. Izak Rankine, to me, one of the most relevant players in the fantasy footy game. That's why he's landed at the number 20 position. Before I give you any clues about who's next, we've got to talk drafts. Here at the Coaches Panel, we choose to draft on the Keeper platform for 2025, but the good news is there's plenty of options that whatever you like in your drafting format to be, it's all for you there. It's just here at the Coaches Panel, we've just got a favourite. That's all it is. He's going to be one of the best forward options for us this year in the draft community. I think the draft community, Mitch, probably even more so than salary cappers, are a little bit more switched on to what Rankine could be as a result. And certainly they've got less options to choose from than we do in the salary cap space. Where does he sit in your rankings? I know you've done a great bit of work in the AFL fantasy scoring space there. What do you see the outcomes? What's his average? What do you kind of project he's going to be for us this year on draft day?
Yeah, so I have him projected to be a back-end F1 for 2025. I think that there's a pretty clear clump of players at the top. I reckon about top 6 players. Your Bailey Smiths, your McRae's, your Francises, your Moores, Caleb Daniels, all those sort of types. I think he's in that next tier. Now, I did a mock draft, it would have been a couple of weeks ago now, by the time this comes out. I drafted Izak Rankine as my second forward in that round, but I drafted him in the 4th round because I wanted to get 2 of those, what I considered to be reliable forwards in my team before I then completely punted the last forward position and got them with my last starting spot. So I see him as a guy that week in, week out, even if he's not in a favourable midfield role, he's going to be a highly featured, prominent part of Adelaide's game. You could argue he's their second best player. In fact, I might make that argument. So regardless of role, he's going to be someone that I think has as far as forwards go this season specifically, he's going to have a pretty relatively safe floor. So I've got him projected in the mid 80s to be a bit conservative with the upside of going that 90 plus. So in with your Matt Kennedys, your Shea Boltons, those sort of type of players. But I think of those 3 players I just mentioned, probably is the safest. So he kind of comes off just after that first tier of forwards. And I'd want to scoop him up after those bunch of players. I think there's a sizable drop off, especially in my confidence.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. Look, in Supercoach, I think he's probably going to be the second forward off the board. Jason Horne-Francis, I think, and understandably so, given just the powerful impact player he is. He's got some other weapons, but he's the number 1 player by average walking in. Take a little bit of an injury in the preseason to see people pivot away from that as much as the upside of the McRae's and the Smiths and the Daniels and others are there. I'm pretty confident that I see Rankine as the number 2 forward off the board in Supercoach scoring drafts, and that makes a lot of sense to me as well. Hey, Mitch, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on this series of the 50 most relevant. I think this is like equal third, like Mini Monk's probably up to about 5 or 6 to be fair, when I've just had a quick look before, but of all the collaborators that we've worked with, you have been the most in demand from the community. They love having you on this series, and there's been a new initiative that the Fantasy Ball Boys have brought in literally just in the last couple of days. So tell us where we can keep in touch with you across social media, but also you've launched a brand new Patreon.
Yes. Very, very excited to announce. So we have, you can find us first at Ball Boys AFL Fantasy if you're not familiar with any of the work we do on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. If you want to gaze upon this lovely hat that I'm wearing. But yes, we have launched a brand new Patreon. We wanted to do something to, appease the appetite out there for anyone who wants to get a little bit deeper into their fantasy footy. You can go and check that one out. It's $10 a month. We just have the 1 tier for people to jump on in. So it is patreon.com/Ball Boys. You can get our blueprints, which I've been doing for the past 3 seasons, which has gotten me in the top 300 each of the last 3 seasons and won me a hat. So at least over the last 3 seasons, it's proven and tested to be successful and at least get you in the frame. You'll get my projections as well. So we talked about draft and my rankings of all these kind of players. So if you want to know exactly, the highs and lows of each player, I've got every single fantasy player projected there. You're going to get exclusive podcasts and lots more. So yeah, head over to the Patreon. We're very excited to launch it. And can't wait to have any of you guys across if you want to join.
Could I encourage you, friend, if you're watching or listening to this, it just makes such a huge difference for people that are giving up their time and energy to create fantasy content for you. They do it out of their love of the game and the love of creating great content. As someone that over the past, last 5, 6, 7 years, we've got some incredibly loyal Patreons. Maybe as you're listening, you're one of them. It's made such a huge difference for us having that support. And can I encourage you, almost regardless of the bonus content that comes your way, would you sign up and join the Ball Boys Patreon? It makes a huge difference for supporting the work that they do. If you do love what Mitch and Luke and the guys have been doing over the last couple of years, maybe you've just stumbled to them this preseason, maybe the 50 most relevant was your gateway to get introduced to them. Friend, can I encourage it? $10 a month. Seriously, it keeps one of the best content creators powering along. So friends, do it. once I finish on this episode, will be joining up as a Patreon myself. So seriously, go and do it. It's one of the best ways to spend $10 a month and support one of the best content creators, but also one of the best people in the fantasy footy community. Make sure you go and do that. And honestly, if you're going to choose between us or them, I'd go and pick them. Like, seriously, just go and pick them. It would be absolutely a great thing to do to support one of the best people in fantasy footy. All right. If you missed
it would definitely help. I was going to say, it'll definitely help justify the obscene amount of time I spend looking at fantasy footy and get my girlfriend off my back, because I've got to show something for all this time, and if she can see, something coming her way, it'll free up a bit more time for me to watch some footy on the weekends and keep giving you guys some good content.
Yeah, pay for date night, like whatever it takes, like we'll make it happen. If you did miss any of those details of where you can get in touch with Mitch, the guys from the Ball Boys, and that Patreon, we've attached it in the description of this episode, so you can go in there, you can check it out, click that through. We seriously encourage you to do so. So who's at number 19 in the 50 most relevant? We are fast approaching the end. Let me give you a clue. Let's see if you can guess who it is. The aim of the game, right, is to hopefully get someone that's priced at a range that's going to outperform that, and you get value for money, outperform with points, and that's one of the trends of what makes you a good coach, right? Identifying guys that are going to outperform their price point. Well, there's a fallen premium that we often always look to, the guys that's like, they've been premiums for years, we should get them, we should start them. And then I've looked at this one guy who's up tomorrow, who's got, over the last handful of years, as good a premium consistency as anybody. And then I've looked at the ownership percentage across all of the formats, and I'm shocked. Have we forgotten this guy? I know there's been some talk about him in the preseason, but this could be one of the biggest gifts to us for value based on consistent premium performance. And yet we've either forgotten him, discounted him as an option, or even worse, not even considered it. Who is he? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 Most Relevant.